Here we go, grade 10s, the last lesson of the 7th week of our online classes. By now, you know where to find all lesson materials and how to get hold of me. Today is the day that we finish working through Macbeth as we look at the last 4 scenes of the play. We shall spend today marking the work from the previous lesson and then working through those final scenes. Make sure that you have everything you need before we go any further. Let's have a look at your answers to the questions for Act 5, Scenes 4 and 5. From the many people on stage, it is clear just how unpopular Macbeth has become. The armed forces are gathering against him at a rapid rate. His isolation is almost complete. Malcolm says that the only people who are still with Macbeth are those who have been forced to stay. Macduff says that they must not assume that the battle will be easy. He says that they should fight properly to ensure victory. The language here is short and decisive. These are men of action. In the previous scene, Macbeth seemed anxious, rattled even. At the end of the scene, he spoke in a rhyming couplet, reminiscent of the witches chanting. Macbeth feels that he can stay safely in his castle and wait out the time. He feels that he will be able to withstand a siege and that the attacking soldiers will fall victim to hunger and famine before he will have to surrender. Lady Macbeth's death is tragic. It could be that Shakespeare doesn't want the audience to feel too much sympathy for her. And it could be a practical reason too. It would be difficult for an actor to fall from a castle wall on stage without hurting himself. Macbeth's soliloquy is important. He uses repetition, personification, metaphor, and alliteration in this speech. He compares the brevity of life to a flame on a candle which is easily extinguished. Shakespeare also uses the metaphor of acting and the theatre here. We are all just actors on this stage of life. Some of us have lead roles that last for a long time. Others have bit parts and appear on stage for a limited time. Macbeth seems disillusioned here. All of his efforts have not been worth it. When he says, "I begin to grow weary of the sun," he's admitting that he is tired of life. It's now time to work through the last 4 scenes of the play to its inevitable and gory end. In scene 6, the witch's prophecy is made clear. Birnam Wood will march to Dunsinane. It's obvious that Macbeth is doomed. In scene 7, Macbeth clings to the last promise that because all men are born of women, he leads a charmed life. Young Siward fights bravely but is killed by Macbeth. There must have been a glimmer of hope here for Macbeth. In the final scenes, Macduff challenges Macbeth and reveals that he was born by caesarean section. Macbeth dies a brave soldier. We see the man who was introduced to us at the beginning of the play. He meets a grisly end with his head chopped off by Macduff. The chain of being is restored when Malcolm is crowned King of Scotland at Scone. For the last time, you will listen to the analysis of these scenes by British teacher Mark Birch. As always, write notes as you listen to his lesson.
Hi, this is Mark Birch, and this is a quick revision of Macbeth Act 5, scenes 6 to 9. And I'm covering these final 4 scenes because it cracks along at a heck of a pace. Scene 6 is really short, 10 lines long. And part of the reason for its inclusion is to create this juxtaposition of place within the play. We've got this dramatic shift in the conclusion of the play that creates tension and helps to convey the inevitability of Macbeth's downfall by alternating between Dunsinane and Malcolm's army. We're getting these dramatic counterpoints that also develop the energy as we shift our focus from one place to the next. So in scene 1, we've got Dunsinane, 2, Malcolm's army, 3, Dunsinane, 4, Malcolm's army, 5, Dunsinane, 6, Malcolm's army. So we're constantly shifting our focus, getting a sense of the tension as it builds and seeing the reactions in both camps. Scene 7 begins with Macbeth stating, "They've tied me to a stake, I cannot fly, but bear like I must fight the course." And this is an allusion to the popular Elizabethan sport of bear baiting, where the bear was set on by dogs. Usually the bear was tied down, as you can see in this image, so that it's impossible for the bear to escape, and it's really a case of deciding how long it's going to take for the bear to die. Macbeth is metaphorically referring to himself as the bear, something powerful, a force, but something that's been constrained by exterior forces, in this case the English lords and the rebels led by Malcolm and Macduff. So there's an inevitability, an acceptance of his own death, I would argue, at this point. The metaphor suggests that the end is only a matter of time. Young Siward enters the scene, and Macbeth is referred to through, once again, the semantic field of hell. So young Siward calls him a name hotter than any is in hell, and the devil himself. So once again, we've got a clear sense that Macbeth is seen as diabolical. Macbeth kills young Siward very easily and laughs at what he's done. "Thou wast born of woman," reminding us again of the fact that Macbeth feels this sense of invulnerability as a result of the premonitions that he's been subject to. The arrogance and hubris is hammered home in "Swords I smile at, weapons laughed to scorn," because they're carried by someone that's of a woman born. Macduff's desperate to strike at Macbeth. He says, "I cannot strike at wretched kerns whose arms are hired to bear their staves." He wants to get Macbeth. Now, those wretched kerns are the kind of foot soldiers that have been hired as mercenaries from Ireland. So he doesn't want to waste his strokes on these people who are being just paid to fight. The interesting thing, however, is that kerns have been referred to before in the play. In Act 1, Scene 2, the merciless MacDonald, the traitor that Macbeth was fighting at the beginning of the play, was supplied with kerns. So we get this kind of intratextual allusion back to Act 1, Scene 2, and everything seems to have become cyclical. Now it's Macbeth that's that traitor who's supplied by kerns, when he was fighting the kerns against the traitor at the beginning of the play. Everything's been reversed. And Shakespeare draws the audience's attention to the fact that the hero has become the traitor. Scene 8 begins with Shakespeare re-establishing the bravery of Macbeth. He says, "Why should I play the Roman fool and die on mine own sword? Whiles I see lives, the gashes do better upon them." In other words, he feels that there's still damage that he can do to his enemies. The Romans would rather take their own lives than suffer defeat, but Macbeth's rejecting that as foolish. He can inflict harm on his enemies, no matter what the outcome for him. Unsurprisingly, as soon as Macduff enters, he uses that semantic field of hell to address Macbeth again. "Turn, hellhound, turn." And to make it even more profound, he uses this zoomorphic comparison as well. That Macbeth's a hellhound, a specific creature of hell that's dehumanized, as well as being rendered something satanic. Macduff and Macbeth begin to fight, and Macbeth's arrogance is presented by Shakespeare in his statements, "Thou losest labour. Let fall thy blade on vulnerable crests. I bear a charmed life which must not yield to one of woman born," reinforcing the words of the apparitions, suggesting that he has this invulnerability and that fosters his arrogance as well. Macduff is not going to be able to attack or kill him. Macduff counters this by revealing that he was born by caesarean, fulfilling that prophecy of the second apparition. Macduff was from his mother's womb untimely ripped. On hearing this news, Macbeth says that it hath cowed my better part of man. In other words, the news has undermined his confidence. Now he's finally got to accept that he's been tricked by the witches, and he articulates this in "These juggling fiends no more be believed than palter with us in a double sense, that keep the word of promise to our ear and break it to our hope." In other words, he recognises that the witches have juggled with their words, cheating him with ambiguities and equivocations. That word equivocations, one that we've come across time and time again in the play, that they've played with words, they've used double meanings in order to trick him and make him do their bidding. The antithetical parallelism highlights the contrast between the hopes created by the witches and the destruction of these hopes. Despite Macduff calling Macbeth a coward, Shakespeare reinforces Macbeth's bravery at this stage. Even now that he's accepted all of the prophecies as being fulfilled, he still refuses to accept his fate. And as in Act 1, Scene 2, he goes on to disdain fortune. He attacks Macduff. Shakespeare begins the final scene with a huge contrast to Macbeth's rule. We get Malcolm's first words being selfless and full of compassion. He's concerned about his friends, he's concerned about his comrades. "I would the friends we miss were safe arrived." Macduff enters the scene with Macbeth's head, so it's worth recognising that Macbeth's killed off stage, maybe to deny him the pity and honour that an on-stage death could afford. It's worth recognising that the power of the supernatural is still evident. This beheading was potentially foreshadowed by the armoured head apparition in Act 4. And Macduff goes on to state, "Behold where stands the usurper's cursed head," reminding the audience of Macbeth's crimes, the crime of usurping the throne, and the consequence of these is dramatically evident in that brandishing of Macbeth's head, a really powerful dramatic statement. Shakespeare grants the final words of the play to Malcolm, when he states, "We shall not spend a large expense of time before we reckon with our several loves." He's presenting Malcolm as a king of action, not procrastination. His actions are immediate, and they're also just. Again, a contrast to Macbeth. Later, when he says, "This dead butcher and his fiend-like queen, who as 'tis fought by self and violent hands took off her life," we get this emotive noun, butcher, which vilifies Macbeth, and the semantic field of hell is applied to Lady Macbeth this time, fiend-like. Malcolm's expressing the belief here that Lady Macbeth took her own life, the first time actually that we're told explicitly about that in the play. And finally, he says that calls upon us by the grace of grace we will perform in measure. Malcolm's using the language of heaven, contrasting with the language of hell that's always been ascribed to Macbeth in the latter stages of the play. The audience is essentially assured that Malcolm will be a righteous king and order will be restored. Okay, ta.
The quotes from the end of the play are well known. A favourite essay question used by English teachers is to ask you whether Malcolm's description of the Macbeths is accurate and fair. Was Macbeth a butcher? Was Lady Macbeth his fiend-like queen? On the next slide, you will listen to a summary of the whole of Act 5. Make sure that you have a good grasp of the plot and character development.
Macbeth, Act 5, Scene 1. Lady Macbeth's bedroom, Dunsinane Castle. Here are two new characters, a doctor and a gentlewoman, who is Lady Macbeth's assistant. The gentlewoman has seen Lady Macbeth sleepwalking. She got out of bed, wrote a letter, and then went back to bed. All the while she was asleep. The doctor wants to know what Lady Macbeth said, but the gentlewoman won't tell him. She's overheard something she shouldn't know. The gentlewoman wants the doctor to hear for himself. Oh, here's Lady Macbeth. She's sleepwalking. She looks like she is washing her hands. She says, "Out, damn spot! Out, I say." Act 5, Scene 1, line 35. There isn't any real blood on her hands, but she acts as if she can't wash her hands clean from blood. Then the sleepwalking Lady Macbeth says, "Who would have thought the old man to have had so much blood in him?" Act 5, Scene 1, line 39 and 40. She's still sleepwalking. She smells her hands. Here's the smell of the blood still. All the perfumes of Arabia will not sweeten this little hand. Act 5, Scene 1, lines 50 and 51. She imagines that even if she tried to cover up the blood smell with perfume, it would not work. This next quote is quite famous. "What's done cannot be undone." Act 5, Scene 1, line 68. The doctor says that Lady Macbeth needs God more than medicine. Her problems are not physical, but spiritual and moral, because she is involved with murder somehow. He tells the gentlewoman to take away anything that Lady Macbeth could use to kill herself. Act 5, Scene 2, the Scottish countryside. A group of Scottish soldiers are marching toward Macbeth's castle at Dunsinane Hill. They talk about who is arriving from England to help defeat Macbeth. Malcolm, the Prince of Cumberland, King Duncan's eldest son. There is Malcolm's uncle, Old Siward, and young Siward, his son, and Macduff. The Scottish soldiers hope to meet up with the English forces at a forest called Birnam Wood. Flashback. Do you remember when the witches showed Macbeth some apparitions? The third apparition was of a child wearing a crown and holding a tree in his hand. He told Macbeth, "You will never be defeated until Birnam Wood moves up to Dunsinane Castle." Well, here's that important quote again. "Macbeth shall never vanquished be until great Birnam Wood to high Dunsinane Hill shall come against him." Act 4, Scene 1, lines 92 and 93. The soldiers talk about Macbeth, calling him the tyrant. A tyrant is a cruel leader. Act 5, Scene 3. Inside Macbeth's castle at Dunsinane. Here is Satan, Macbeth's servant. He has nothing to do with Satan, the devil. He has an unfortunate name and an unfortunate boss. Many of Macbeth's soldiers are deserting him. He doesn't want to hear about them. No more reports about who is leaving. Macbeth believes 100% in the witches' prophecies. He is confident that no one will defeat him. He quotes what the witches told him. Macbeth says, "Till Birnam Wood remove to Dunsinane, I cannot taint with fear." Act 5, Scene 3, lines 2 and 3. A servant arrives with some news. 10,000 English soldiers are approaching. Macbeth calls for his armor. He wants to put it on, even though it's too early to get ready for the actual battle. Macbeth has been a warrior all his life, and he will feel more prepared wearing his armor. He is ready to die fighting. Macbeth says, "I'll fight till from my bones my flesh be hacked." Act 5, Scene 3, line 32. Macbeth asks the doctor for an update on Lady Macbeth's health. The doctor says that Lady Macbeth is suffering from hallucinations. Macbeth orders the doctor to cure his wife and also to cure the land, Scotland, of its disease. The doctor is glad to be leaving the castle and says he will not return for any amount of money. Act 5, Scene 4. The country near Birnam Wood. Malcolm, Macduff and the English soldiers have joined forces with the Scottish soldiers. Malcolm tells every soldier to cut down a tree branch in the forest of Birnam Wood, hold it in front of himself, and by this method, the soldiers still in Macbeth's castle will not be able to clearly know the number of attacking English and Scottish soldiers. Act 5, Scene 5, inside Dunsinane Castle. Macbeth says the castle walls are very strong and that attackers will not get in and they'll have to starve to death outside the castle walls. The cries of women are heard. Macbeth says, I have almost forgot the taste of fears. Act 5, Scene 5, line 9. Macbeth has forgotten what dreadful things are like. He used to be afraid of a shriek in the night or a ghost story. Macbeth says, I have supped full with horrors, meaning I have eaten or experienced so many real horrors. Direness, familiar to my slaughterous thoughts, cannot once startle me. I am used to horrible events, so nothing startles me anymore. Act 5, Scene 5, lines 12 to 14. Macbeth is told that his wife is dead. The play doesn't say how she died. It's implied that she jumped to her death. Macbeth says she should have died hereafter. Act 5, Scene 5, line 17. There are two possible meanings here. She should have had a longer life, but also we're getting ready for battle, and so I can't properly mourn for her. Macbeth pauses from preparing for the attack with one of his most famous speeches. He says, tomorrow and all tomorrows lead to the end of time. He compares life to a series of 4 images. Macbeth compares dying to a candle losing its flame. Out, out, brief candle. Life's but a walking shadow. Macbeth compares life to a poor actor who performs on the stage for an hour and then you don't hear anything about him. Life is a poor player, an actor, who struts and frets his hour upon the stage and then is heard no more. He says life is a tale told by an idiot full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. The theme of this speech is life is meaningless. A messenger arrives and says that he saw the forest of Birnam Wood moving toward the castle. Macbeth begins to doubt the prophecies. He orders his soldiers to fight outside the castle. He says, at least we'll die with armor on our backs. Act 5, Scene 6, outside Dunsinane Castle. Malcolm, the Seawards, and Macduff lead the army to Macbeth's castle. Malcolm orders all the soldiers to drop the tree branches as they're so close to the castle. Malcolm announces that the Seawards are going to lead the first attack. Act 5, Scene 7. Macbeth is confronted by young Seaward. Macbeth kills the young warrior and says, "You were born from a woman." Macbeth is still hanging on to the witches' prophecies. Macduff doesn't want to fight ordinary soldiers. He says that the ghosts of his family will haunt him if he doesn't kill Macbeth. Act 5, Scene 8. Macduff catches up to Macbeth. Macbeth says he doesn't want to see Macduff because he already killed Macduff's family. Macduff continues to be a man of few words. He says, "I have no words. My voice is in my sword." Act 5, Scene 8, line 7. Macbeth says, "I bear a charmed life, which must not yield to one of woman born." Act 5, Scene 8, lines 12 and 13. Macduff has news for him. He says, "Macduff was from his mother's womb, Untimely ripped. Act 5, Scene 8, line 15. Well, what does that mean? Macduff's mother had a cesarean birth. He was cut out of his mother's womb. Macduff kills Macbeth off stage. Old Seward is told that his son was killed by Macbeth. The old man is sad, but content that his son died a soldier's death. Macduff enters carrying Macbeth's head and says that Malcolm is the new king of Scotland. Hail, King, for so thou art. Act 5, Scene 9, line 19.
King Malcolm! King Malcolm!
Malcolm grants everyone who fought a new royal title. They will all become earls. He invites everyone to Scone, the ancient place where kings of Scotland are officially crowned. This concludes The Tragedy of Macbeth by William Shakespeare. Subscribe, share, reduce the pain of Shakespearean study everywhere.
Believe it or not, the whole play can be summarized in 12 panels. The witches get the ball rolling. Lady Macbeth manipulates her husband. People are murdered. Crowns are exchanged. More people are murdered, and the crown changes hands again. See, it's not such a difficult plot. As you know by now, there are a lot of corpses left on this stage. Have a look at this, the Macbeth death clock. From the first death, the traitor MacDonald, to the last death, the traitor Macbeth, the body count is unusually high, even for Shakespeare. It is a violent play, reflecting a violent period in history. And there is much here that is relevant today. You need to be able to write about your theme in detail. You should be able to give examples from the text, embedding quotes that you have learned, and link these examples to plot and character development. You'll spend some time on this next week. Ta-da! We have finished our reading of the text of Macbeth. Well done, grade 10s. If you were a diligent student, you'll find writing the essay quite easy. I look forward to our next lessons next week. Goodbye, everyone.